And let me introduce the two panelists. We have Sarah Almond-Pike. Sarah, raise your hand. Has had a long passion for women's rights. To be so long, she's had a long passion for, to be so young, to have a long passion. But anyway, she has a joint honors BA degree in international development and gender studies from McGill. And while she was there, she worked at the Montreal Sexual Assault Crisis Line. And she interned for an international indigenous rights organization. When she moved to California, she has been on the board of the United Nations Association, the UN-USA Mid-Peninsula chapter. And she's leading the campaign, the Cities for CEDAW campaign for Palo Alto. And she's also director of a publishing for a young education company. And in the intervening time, she just started her first year at Boat Hall School of Law the other day. And Gloria Salas, Gloria is here, flew up from LA, was born and raised in Los Angeles, and she still resides in the county of LA. And as she says, her mother was one of her earliest influences in her hometown back in Mexico in the 40s. And she taught Gloria and her siblings that every woman had untapped power within herself, and once that realization broke through the surface, each woman could use that power and the world had better get out of the way. So she was instilled with that as a young child. She attended Pepperdine University, and she graduated with a degree in legal studies, and until recently she was an office manager of a 60-person law firm in LA. But she still works in the legal field, but she's doing a lot more advocacy these days. And she's a member of the Zonta Club of Burbank and its service and advocacy committees. And she recently returned from Washington, D.C., where she and her Zonta sisters advocated before the U.S. representatives regarding the ERA Campus Accountability Act and CEDAW. So those are our two panelists. And we're very fortunate to have them. So I'm going to ask them a series of questions. We're going to have a conversation, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So, Sarah, how did you get started and get involved with CEDAW? And why were you motivated to do so?
Sure. Thank you, Julianne. Before that, I just want to say that I'm so humbled to be here with so many people who have been working on CEDAW for decades. Coming from Canada, I'm very new to this fight because Canada has ratified CEDAW, and I'm happy to speak to the ways in which I think that was beneficial coming from Canada, but just wanted to acknowledge all the great work, and very happy to be here speaking with all of you, so thank you. I got involved with CEDAW in part in the US because I was so shocked to learn that the United States had not ratified. Then seeing that it was unlikely that we would, as a nation, be passing it in Washington, it made a lot of sense to me to focus locally. To borrow a little bit from Teresa's excellent remarks, it's a lot easier to fight discrimination locally. And to follow up on what you've been saying, Julianne, and others, there's no need for us to wait, right, for what we want to see in our communities and the values that we want to be living out. So it made a lot of sense to me that, okay, we have this great mechanism, CEDAW. It sounds a little bit intimidating, but in practice, it really just means let's take a gender lens to look at policy at the local level, and let's bring this home and let's implement it city by city. So that's how I got involved down in Palo Alto. We have a small team of 3 people, which has been quickly growing, and I'm happy to speak to that later on, to the details of it. Okay. I think I'm also here as a bit of a messenger because I was incredibly fortunate to attend a meeting of various Cities for CEDAW advocates in New York City during the Commission on the Status of Women back in March, and I'm happy to speak to all the wonderful things as well as the challenges that I heard from the various representatives and cities there.
Okay. Gloria?
Thank you again for the invitation to come here. The way I got started was purely by accident. Up until a year ago, I had no idea what CEDAW was, didn't know how to spell it, and people had to continuously tell me what the letters meant. I belong to Zonta International with our local club in Burbank. One of our members, who was lieutenant governor of our region at the time, happened to attend a meeting up here in San Francisco, and this is where she heard for the first time the word CEDAW. So she came down, and because she was lieutenant governor and she had to oversee quite a few states, she asked us if anybody was interested in doing some research about it. Had to do with women's rights, and of course that pregnant pause. No one raised their hand. So I raised my hand. And I started doing the research. I didn't do it right away, but within a few weeks I went online, I Googled, Google is your best friend. I found out about Cities for CEDAW. And I saw a list of names with their email addresses, so I just randomly chose all these strangers and sent them emails asking them for information, what it meant to their city, how they started, what their challenges were. And within a month, I received my first response from Dade County in Florida. And then she, in turn, told me, you should contact this person in Los Angeles. And she put me in touch with several people in Los Angeles. And one of those, Marisela Arceli, told me, get in touch with Marilyn Fowler. And then from there, Marilyn's been holding our hand, and she has actually come and given a presentation to our Zonta Club, letting us know what it is exactly, what we need to do. And at the time, it was difficult simply because no one knew about it. And what motivated me in my research, I found, actually being a member of Zonta for just a few years, I found that Zonta International had actually supported the ratification of CEDAW and was asking all its members to please advocate to their government leaders to continue with this process. So I brought this back, and also CEDAW aligns very well with the principles of Zonta's mission, which is women's rights are human rights. And that's how I started, and that's what motivated me.
And so let's move to some of the activities, Sarah, that you have done down in the Mid-Peninsula and your work with Cities for CEDAW.
Certainly. So they've been very humble, but they've been effective. I think a point I'd really like to drive home is that there's no magic in passing CEDAW. There's no special way that you absolutely have to go about it. There's no one-size-fits-all for each and every city. It's just a lot of hard work, but also fun work, and that's going to be different for each city. But in Palo Alto, what we did was we started by contacting our mayor at the time, who was a woman and who we thought would be very interested. We got her on board to be an advocate for us, and we didn't move fast enough. New mayor was elected, and we had to start over. So from that, we learned a really important lesson, which was to sort of build out a broader coalition and to find multiple points of access and multiple avenues through which we were going to push to try and get this done. To have everything riding on one person was not the way to go, which is also something we heard a lot about from the other cities in New York, trying to go through multiple avenues. So what we've been doing now is we have a member of our city council who we approached, who we knew would be interested. We mainly knew that because his mother was a long-standing member of the AAUW, and he was a great promoter of women's rights, and we approached him and got him on board. Something then somewhat serendipitous happened, which was that because of the current political context, he was looking to pass a resolution in Palo Alto reaffirming the values of inclusivity and acceptance and openness in Palo Alto, unfortunately due to racist, anti-Semitic graffiti and other things that have been happening in the city. Now, what turned out to be, in a way, positive about that was that the community said, absolutely not. This is not acceptable, and this member of city council, along with others, passed a resolution to reaffirm the values that we did want. what we were able to do was really rally behind the city councilor, go and speak at oral argument of the city council meeting, really activate people we knew to help get that passed, and it did pass. So now we had done something that in of itself was valuable, and we also had the city councilor who felt, okay, I want to help this group go forward. Since then, we've also been approaching the Human Relations Commission. So most cities would have a Human Relations Commission, which would likely be the most reasonable way to have maybe an oversight body without creating a new one, or the most likely group to bring this forward. We've gotten them on board, and they have decided just as of about 2 weeks ago, after we gave an informational meeting, to make this part of their working plan for the year. So they are now working on drafting a CEDAW ordinance for Palo Alto. So again, it wasn't glamorous. We had an informational meeting in a church hall, and we just spoke to people, and we spoke to everyone we could find. We utilized our networks like the AAUW, who co-sponsored with us, other groups in our area, which is again something that seems to be a really successful strategy that we've been hearing from other cities. So don't go it alone, work with other groups, and again, to think really broadly. I think it's really important going forward that we view this as an intersectional ordinance, right? We know that gender is not the only thing. Gender identity, race, socioeconomic status. Think broadly about what other kinds of groups share these same goals with us, and then bring them on board, because we're much stronger when we work together.
Thank you. And we'll come back to talk about New York City and whatever, but Gloria.
I'm just trying to figure out where to start. Now, a disclaimer, and as they say, what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. What I say now in this room stays in this room. I had no intention when I was appointed by one of my council members to be on the Municipal Charter Review Committee to add to it, or to suggest that we have CEDAW, or that we create a commission on the status of women. I had no inclination, didn't even think that far. I was just looking at the charter. But as I read the charter, and I read it over and over and over again, I thought, there's no mention of women. There's nothing about policies towards women or girls. So when it came time to the recommendation, I suggested CEDAW, and of course no one knew about it, and I also suggested the creation of the Commission on the Status of Women. And of course the city attorney, who is a woman, said why. So, and I started to explain why. And fortunately, there were 5 of us on this review committee, 2 of us were women. There were no objections. It passed unanimously to recommend to the council a creation of the Commission of Women and the Status of Women. But CEDAW was going to be a little bit more difficult because nobody knew what it was. And as soon as I mentioned it, one of the gentlemen there almost sprang from his chair and said, that comes from the UN High Commission, and there is nothing that that body has for us. There is no foreign government that is going to regulate our laws, no foreign government that's going to review anything that this country. It was, I'm not sure where he was receiving this information, but I had already been told that one of our council members was going to veto anything that had to do with the UN. So we were told when it came to CEDAW to wait until this recent election. And if he was voted out, then we had a better chance. He was voted out, and now we have 2 women on the council, and a plus is that one of those women happens to be a member of the Zonta group. So she is on board with this. We have to just convince our second female council member to get on board. And then the other 2, one of the other council members has said that whatever I want to do, he will back me. And, but it's difficult. It seems like it's going to be simpler to create a commission on the status of women so that we'll have an organization, because we don't have a human relations committee in Burbank, but to have a CSW that would be able to back CEDAW. However, I have been attending quite a few CSW meetings throughout the county, and one of them actually gave me a very good idea. Just ask the councilwoman to have her make the request to have it ratified, or at least make it into a resolution. And then from there, you see where the rest of the council, where the public is going to come out in their public opinions. So it's a slow process for us.
But it seems like there's some commonalities in you're all talking about the political context in which to do this work. And that's very, very important. I see we have 5 minutes left. What would you say some of the challenges are and lessons learned, just briefly? You've touched on some of that.
Well, as Sarah mentioned, doing the backdoor type of politicking and going and starting to talk to people, and that's what we're doing. We're getting some of the people in different organizations that are maybe not all women, like the Rotary and the Kiwanis, and also talking to some of those people and women members on the boards and commissions that are in place right now through the City of Burbank. But also, the City of Burbank is looking at a deficit of a few $1 million, and so they're also looking at the boards and commissions and determining which ones they're going to eliminate. So that was another question as to, if we're going to eliminate some boards and commissions, why do we need another one? But we think that we have pretty good support, and again, it's not putting all our hopes on one person, because that person may not be there again. So we're trying to make sure that we get at least the councilwoman, who's a Zanshan, to go ahead and push this forward.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with everything that Gloria said. I think, the issue of turnover, and then we know, okay, the way we address that is we get as many different people as we can. A couple of other things that you mentioned, Gloria, I also heard in New York. So hesitation around this language of the UN and people who have pushback against the UN. One way around that is to try and educate people about the UN, and we can hopefully do two good things at once in that way. If there's real hesitancy, maybe we back off that language, and maybe we use language that's really, really localized and make it really specific to our cities. Those are some ideas we heard in New York. I think one of the major challenges is definitely funding, which Gloria alluded to. I think funding is so important, though. What we were hearing, and I see Emily Morales, who could speak so well to all of these issues, probably nodding her head that having money to put our money where our mouths are to make sure these things get done, that really trying at the outset to ensure that the funding is there when you pass an ordinance or a resolution, so you don't have to go back later and fight for it. And I think another issue is one of focus. We've heard today, and we're also aware that so much is going on right now, and a lot of difficult things, and people are tired. And I'm tired, and I have been at this for 2 years, and I feel tired. So again, my hats are off to people here who have been doing this work for so long. I think, though, that's what makes CEDAW so great, is that it's very specific. It's very concrete. If you have people who are flailing around and are unsure what to do, call a friend who's in another city or in another state and say, hey, have you heard about CEDAW? Here's what it is. Here's what the acronym is, which we all struggled with. It's really easy to learn. This is just a tool that you could use in your city and helping bring things really to a concrete place where we can do something.
Thank you.
I know we're out of time, but I just want to say something very quickly. I came across an opinion piece that was put out by the League of Women Voters, 2009, where she ended with that women's issues are being pushed back from the front and center because of the crisis at the moment. When we went in June to advocate for CEDAW and for the ERA to our senators and our congressmen, their aides said, well, of course, we come from Burbank, so we've got very progressive representatives. We were told, we're with you, but there's a crisis in Washington now, so we're not going to focus. We can't focus on it. So we have to focus on it and keep pushing so that they will realize, okay, we're their constituents, and they have to listen.
So we've got 1 minute. I hope we've given you some idea of the contents of CEDAW, the treaty, and you've seen some ideas about the Cities for CEDAW campaign. And if you look around the world, CEDAW has meant such a difference in the countries that have ratified the treaty. Some countries have changed constitutional provisions. Others have adopted laws and resolutions in their home countries to deal with a host of issues, from education to healthcare to marriage and divorce. When I was in Brazil, they were revamping the whole Constitution, and they lifted out complete provisions and parts of CEDAW and put them in the Brazilian Constitution. And so there've been changes all over the world. It's possible. That's just one example, and we have more information. And I think hats off to the Cities for CEDAW, the San Francisco Department on the Status of Women, who went to the committee, the UN Oversight Committee of CEDAW, back at a meeting in, November 2015. And it was the first time there had been a report based on CEDAW from the United States. Because the US government hasn't ratified the treaty, there was no official governmental report like they are required to do. But civil society was invited to come to speak to this group. It's an expert group of 23 experts from around the world. They were invited to come to talk about the Cities for CEDAW campaign, and a number of the representatives from those particular countries were very excited, and they were going back to their home countries and say, we should do something like this also. So I hope that we have given you some idea of the possibilities. And I want to thank Gloria and Sarah for the panel.